Roy Bahat, head of Bloomberg Beta. Very happy to have you on our still burgeoning, but I think relatively in the maturing mode show AI EDU Studios. Roy, you and I met a long time ago. Before most people were talking about AI, you were talking about the future of work. I don't know if you would have thought of yourself as an AI person. You certainly were one of the thought leaders on the conversation about the future of work, which was about more than just, and I think is about more than just AI. But how do you describe yourself now? How, is it any different from when we would have first met back in 2018, 2019?
I mean, we've been investing in AI as a firm since 2014. And so for sure, AI would have been then my number one investment area. And I don't know, am I an AI person? We're all still figuring it out. So like the most expert people I know in AI are the ones with the least confidence about what is happening right now. And so together, we're all trying to shape this understanding live as it's happening. So I think in that way, it's a lot the same. I teach at Berkeley. And so I have some limited amount of understanding of the educational setup and a parent of teenage kids. And so that's how I relate to all this.
What do you teach at Berkeley?
I teach in the business school. I teach two courses, one on the business of media and the other on leading an organized or organizing workforce, because I spent a bunch of time with organized labor. So, I'm a VC at Bloomberg Beta who believes that AI is the most important technology trend that's affecting our world, and workers organizing is the most important human trend that's affecting at least our economic world, our working world. And so those are the areas where I spend time.
Excellent. Yeah, I would love to dive into that. Putting on your hat as, there's so much that I was thinking about what to talk with you about. I want to start with actually just sort of like the most recent stuff that I've been obsessed with, and I'm curious if you've had a chance to think about it. So first, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they published, I think it was in February, but
Do they still publish statistics?
Well, this was in February, so this is that question will have to be answered sort of in real time. I don't know if this is like an official update to their stats. I'll be honest, I'm not extremely deep into BLS's sort of the arcane details of how BLS works, but they basically published this update to some of their projections to incorporate AI. And the thing that jumped out at me was they're predicting, I think, like 18 to 19% growth in computer science jobs over the next 10 years, which stands in stark contrast to what I have heard from folks who are really on the front lines of this technology and their expectations about the impact it's going to have on unemployment. Hot take. I don't know if someone were to ask
employment predictions are stupid.
Yeah.
The BLS, as last I recall, took current trends and just extrapolated. They have been wrong many times, but that's because prediction is really hard. And, one of the reasons why it's so hard is, first of all, you have two effects. You have an income and substitution effect for the economists. It's basically like you make it easier to be a software developer and make software developers more productive. There are reasons to think you might want fewer software developers because each one can do more. And there are reasons to think you might want more because you want more software developers compared to marketers or something like that. And so both of those effects happen at the same time. But the other thing that happens is work constantly gets redefined. What a teacher does today compared to what a teacher did 30 years ago, many of the things are the same and some of the things are different. And so the faster we do these things, these changes, the more we relabel. Like, what is a software engineer today versus 10 years ago? It's a different kind of a job. By the way, it's a different job now from what it was a month ago. And so, meaning the AI tools have been improving that fast. And so I don't know how to make predictions about it. And I'm not even sure why they matter. Like, let's say I told you that we were going to have 10% more software engineers and not 10% less or something like that. How much would it affect things? I'm just not sure.
I think it would affect things. Surely if you're a junior in high school,
okay,
and you're trying
what job should I prepare myself for?
Well, and also, should I take on $50,000 of debt per year to go to a tier 2 computer science program?
Totally. And I think the answer to that is as hard to answer now as it was to answer 5 years ago, which is honestly, I just don't know. in a lot of cases. And one of the things that I believe is happening, and this is a place where AI can be very helpful in a learning environment, is, the old model, the model that I went to school under, is first you learn and then you do. You prepare yourself and then you do the thing. The tools have become so good that there's no reason why learning and doing should be so divorced from each other. So I look at schools like, I think we've talked about this high school for entrepreneurship in Fresno, the Patino School. Those students graduate with businesses. That is wild. When I look at a tool like Replit, we were investors in Replit. Replit started out as a learning tool. We are investors in Replit. Started out as a learning tool for classrooms to learn how to code. Now I just type in plain English what I want the software to do. And it does it. It makes it, and I have to learn how to do that. It's not automatic. I have to learn like the way you learn riding a bicycle. But so my own kids ask me, what job should I go for? And I'm like, I honestly don't know. But I think the
Of all parents, so this should give solace to parents who feel like they don't know the answer to the question, because
none of us knows.
Roy Bahat doesn't know.
The only answers that I think are true are either true by luck or they are bullshit. And so what I tell my kids is learn how to make your own money, learn how to continuously improve your own skills, because I just spoke to a group of HR professionals yesterday, and this learning and doing thing has lots of in the workplace analogs, which is, it used to be you got to the workplace and you expected your employer to teach you how to do your job. You went to training sessions, and of course all that is still true to some extent, but it is the people who will themselves learn how to use the skills and be, I call this in the terms of use of technology, being the CIO of your own life, the chief information officer of your own life. If you're the person constantly doing that, somebody on that panel described Perplexity, which is a company that we in tech know well. It's a search engine that I use as an alternative to Google because it looks things up and finds the articles on the internet using AI and then writes a summary. It's like what I want Google to do. And somebody on stage called it that P company. And I almost laughed because it's like the level of knowledge that those of us have who are paying attention to trying to improve the skills and the level of knowledge others have is just really different. And so I think my advice—
they couldn't think of the name.
What's that?
They couldn't think of the name.
Yeah, it wasn't even couldn't think of the name. It was more that it struck them as some newfangled tool that had just come out when it's been part of my core workflow for 2 years. Like I wouldn't forget the name of Gmail. And so, to me, the advice to students is going to be less about which job title and occupation do you choose and more about skills that will be robust across different occupations. And so, is it worth learning computer science? I definitely think it's worth learning. Is it worth taking $50,000 of debt to do it? That I can't speak to because that gets to like your family's financial circumstances. And so I'm not going to say, yes, it's for sure worth it. You should do that because I just don't know.
I think this might be actually an area where you and I have sort of like slightly differing points of view.
I can learn from you.
My instinct is if you look at some of the research of how generative AI is used right now in knowledge work, what concerns me is that you're seeing like a few things. Like there's a deterioration of skills among people who are overly reliant or comfortable or confident in the tools. And so it's almost like, it's ironically like the more confident you are in AI, you're actually less and less effective because what you need is someone who is sufficiently skeptical and like really paying attention. It's like I don't know if you have a Tesla, but my friends who have Teslas will tell you that like the self-driving.
I'm a venture capitalist in San Francisco. Of course, I have a Tesla. I have a sticker that says I bought this before Elon went crazy. But
good. So we can you tell? I mean, do you use a self-driving mode? Do you still? I do. Do you find yourself like, are you hold two hands on the wheel?
No, of course not. Right. Like all of us. I do the thing where I try to pay as little attention as needed before the system times me out. And I even have special sunglasses in my car so it can't tell if I'm paying attention.
Because there's a camera, right? That will actually sort of like look to see.
Yeah, it's creepy too.
And this is despite you knowing that there are plenty of stories of people who overly relied on self-driving mode and got into accidents.
Yeah, for sure.
Isn't this going to be something that companies care about? If you're an accounting firm, if you're a law firm,
of course,
the idea that, well, you don't, I mean, because I think what I'm pushing back on, and I don't want to straw man what your point of view, but what I push back on, at the summit that you spoke at, I was there as well. And you'll hear people say stuff like, well, all people need to know is they need to just learn how to use AI, and that can replace sort of like the knowledge and skills that they're currently learning. And
I never said that.
you didn't say that, and so
And I
I've
would
been
never
pushing
say
that.
that.
So help me thread this needle
Yeah,
then,
so this
because
is how I thread that. Is if you rely on the AI's outputs and take it at face value, it's the same as if you hired somebody to work for you. I think of AI as like a really good intern. A lot of
okay,
people have said this. If I rely on the intern's facts, I mean, I remember I wrote a post about learning to code in like 2012 or something like that. Asa Hutchinson, when he ran for governor, like excerpted that piece and put it off as his own policy, and somebody, BuzzFeed or somebody, wrote a story about it. Why did that happen? Because the intern put it there and passed it off as their own work. The governor, the gubernatorial candidate, didn't do that. In fact, he had the class to call me and apologize. And I didn't care. I was just happy that the work got out there. But I cared a lot that he was classy enough to own his work. So I don't think you can rely on the AI's outputs and just treat it as finished. But I do think that the people who are more reliant on AI to get the work done, to take parts of the workflow over, are going to perform much better. So that's the trick. And like here, what I don't want to have happen is everybody's like, it's really sad that everybody's learning how to bake bread because they just don't know how to make flour anymore. And it's really important that human beings know how to mill the flour themselves. It's like, no, somebody has to do that. And I need to know, as the buyer of the flour, that they've done it in a way that's safe and blah, blah, blah. But what we are learning right now is intuition over when can I trust the thing and when can't I? When do I have to double check? I mean, somebody just did a profile on me that a fundraiser did where they used OpenAI's deep research to do like a dossier on me. And it was amazing because it had insights in there. I was like, oh my God, if somebody tried to fundraise for me using that, it would totally work. Like, it understood my psychology. But the very first bullet said I was the son of Holocaust survivors who went to NYU. And I'm not the son of Holocaust survivors, and I did not go to NYU. I am the grandson of people whose siblings died in the Holocaust. And so it's kind of truthy in a certain way. But so I think the way to square the circle you're describing is we need to learn the skill of when to trust the outputs and when not to. And blind faith is basically always stupid.
And when you describe, for example, like a school leaning more into providing students with this opportunity to do entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Like as I can attest, building a company requires a heck of a lot of expertise and like the rapid acquisition of expertise in things that you don't know.
Yep.
And so to me, that's what you're describing is actually different formulations of how students are building and capturing that expertise and how they are representing their mastery and knowledge and how we're assessing them. It isn't necessarily that, but I think this is important, right? You're not saying that they just need to get really good at the AI. It's like necessary but not sufficient. I think being an effective user of the AI.
Yeah. Words like replace, I'm really hesitant to use because replacement, first of all, it's lazy intellectually because you sort of imagine the job as it is, and the only thing you imagine is the replacement. So like, instead of me doing the dishes, there's a robot doing the dishes, something like that. Instead, what I think ends up happening is that the activities shift around as we redefine how we do it. I mean, replacement to me makes me think, that story about how the early ads on television were just like radio ads where the announcer just sat there and read the ad. That's replacement. Replacement is stupid. But what will happen is redefinition of everything. What experiences will I need and won't I need? And it's going to keep changing. Like, it's not the other model that's broken is the model of learn then do, because we've all talked about lifelong learning, but learn then do assumes you get trained at the beginning of your career, then you do your whole career, and yeah, you improve as you go by learning on the job, but I actually think it's going to be much more continuous, which maybe is obvious.
You don't make predictions, so maybe you can just sort of give me feedback on this. An idea I have is that there's this assumption right now that AI is going to be really good at replacing entry-level jobs. So maybe start with that assumption. Do you buy that? That like if you look at sort of the jobs that a company has,
it depends.
Is it really just the entry level jobs? I'm not convinced by that.
No, I mean, I think what is true, the big surprise with generative AI, so tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Replit, etc. And there's lots of other kinds of AI. Like, we invest in AI that makes aircraft flight routes more direct. That doesn't have anything to do with generative AI. Or very little anyway. They may use some generative AI somewhere. There's the big surprise is everybody used to be worried about all the low wage work being automated. And now I know a lot of software developers who are worried and lawyers who are worried and et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's a major shift. I think that the other thing is it's going to vary a lot depending on the nature of the work. So like some care work is going to be really hard to automate. Like, I think we did focus groups. We've been working on these things for a long time. And in 2016, I think we did focus groups on people who, in addition to their job, cared for an aging relative, because the multi-generational thing is going to be much more of a thing. Like, by the way, the one prediction I'll make about work is people are going to be older.
Yeah.
Which is huge and so obvious that we don't even think about it. Like, I was like, how are the kids going to learn AI? You're working on education. It's essential. But I'm actually much more worried about what 55-year-olds are going to do than I am about what 15-year-olds are going to do. Because there's going to be more 55-year-olds at work than 15-year-olds or 18 or 21-year-olds.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And the proportion of the workforce that is older is going to grow. And so, I don't know, I guess I'm not sure if it's giving you like a satisfying answer, because I think a lot of this is just unknown, but it's going to vary by occupation. The thing that people will want is anything where the person demanding it wants it to come from a human. And the focus group example is we talked to a guy in the focus group. I was behind glass or whatever. And he was saying how he cares for his like aging aunt or something like that. And the focus group person said, like, you're a successful person. You're like he was an executive at an insurance company or something like that. And she's like, you can afford to have somebody care for your aunt. Why don't you do that? And he's like, because my aunt doesn't want somebody. She wants me. And that you can never take away. By definition, you can never take it away. But, could call center jobs be less plentiful? Yeah, of course they could. Might the people who do those jobs need to do something else? Yeah. I mean, 100% of the work is going to be automated because 100% of the work always gets automated. Like if you look at look at you and me. If you ask my great grandparents about work and you said, this is what we're doing right now. You and I are both at work right now. They'd be like, that's not work. Like my grandfather lost his eye at work. And so my point is just that we continually redefine. And the really meaningful question is what produces a life that somebody wants to live, values, experience, and enough money that they can include it as part of that they can feed their family and live in a safe and stable way. Those are very open questions. We can talk more about the different kinds of AI and how it might affect things, but those are the big questions to me.
Yeah, this is, I think, folks in the education space struggle because they hear this, setting aside actually talking about artificial general intelligence, but, you hear folks who are really at the front lines of this saying things like, it's actually possible that the vast majority of work is displaced. And it just, for folks in education, their heads kind of explode because it's not really like, it's easy for us to think about, okay, how do we sort of shift education to orient students towards a slightly different set of career pathways? But then when you have someone come and say, well, actually, there may not be pathways for a lot of folks. And we need to sort of think about how we put the role of education in there. And
I think that's
I don't know how productive it is.
I think that's a busted model, a mental model in the following way. We will always have pathways because we will always redefine what we do as work. Whatever we do in the US, like again, what you and I are doing right now.
You're just saying what we think of as work will change.
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. Now, but I do think it's an open question about how will they be able to earn enough to live and how will they enjoy their lives? And that's where things like government policy, one of the reasons I believe in a much higher social floor, and as a proud AFT member, my union has advocated for a higher social floor. In many, many ways, just more general, is because I think it'll stabilize many of those transitions. Because just because there might be more jobs in total doesn't necessarily help, Alex Notran, who's the other Alex, who doesn't have a good job that he loves, like running an AI education nonprofit.
One of the heuristics that I use is if someone's, because like sometimes people want much more actionable. They're like, is my job at risk? And as you say, it's hard to say.
No. Actually, I think that's not hard to say. The answer to that is yes.
The answer, okay.
Anybody who asks you, is my job at risk? The answer is yes. There are questions around which aspects of your job.
Right.
we invested in a company called WorkHelix that does workforce analysis for big companies, where they basically determine here are the jobs that are more and less vulnerable right now. So there's a question about degree of vulnerability. There's a question about timing, but everybody, like the notion of I'm going to pick a career, it's going to be safe for a long time and I'm going to be fine. There might be some exceptions, but in general, I think that's gone away. And look, we invest in a company called Campus that is a national high quality community college. And people who do learning in a new environment like that, I actually think are much more likely to be successful than people who think the old ways still apply. Like the old ways, if they worked 10 years ago, which I don't think they did, they for sure don't work anymore.
One of the heuristics, because yeah, sometimes I think people are still not necessarily happy with, well, all jobs are at risk. So one of the heuristics I use is, open up your calendar and like look at how much time you spent interacting with people and how much time you spend sitting in front of your computer. And what I say is it doesn't really matter what you're doing at your computer, whether that's writing or researching or coding or analyzing. That is probably not a good sign if too much of your day is solo, sort of like creation of stuff or writing stuff. In a previous conversation, though, you sort of challenged me a bit because you said, well, right now we assume that like things like empathy and communication are sort of the bastion of human work, but I want to paraphrase, but you were like, I'm not so sure about that.
I definitely, no.
5 years.
I for sure believe that if we tell ourselves bedtime stories, like humans are inherently empathetic and machines are not. I mean, there's already studies suggesting the AI has better bedside manner than the typical doctor.
Yeah.
So I think there's a great book, The Man Who Lied to His Laptop, about how people anthropomorphize machines, written by the guy who, if folks are old enough to remember Clippy in Microsoft Word, he figured out why people hate Clippy so much. He was a Stanford professor, Cliff Nass. And I think that we shouldn't tell ourselves bedtime stories. And instead, it's about figuring out where is the enduring value and assuming it's just going to keep evolving. And I just don't see, people are looking for the safer place, the higher ground. And I just think that's not a great way to think about it.
Because it's all going to get flooded at some point and you just need to learn to swim. Did you watch the Y Combinator podcast about vibe coding? But you've heard the top lines, right? About like a quarter of their cohort report that 95% of their code base is written by AI. None of this is in conflict with any of the things that you've shared earlier. Have you heard similar things from Bloomberg Betas?
I hope it's true. I mean, look, first of all, we had an emergency meeting of our portfolio last month because so many people were freaked out by how much faster they could go using AI tools to code. They wanted to make sure they were all learning from each other. These are expert startup founders. The second thing I'd say is this isn't new in some ways. Like, the paradox is it's new and the tools are new and it's moving fast, but the principles are not that new. And in a way, I think that's an analog to education. It's like people learning how to think for themselves, how to assess what's right and what's not, moral. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff where the principle is still going to apply. It's just a question of how. And so the reason I say it's not new, in 2012, maybe 2013, I was very interested in this question of how people could learn to code because I assumed everybody would learn to code at some point because I just saw how useful it was becoming, how much easier it was becoming. And a friend of mine introduced me to this guy who was the professor at Stanford who taught the intro computer science class just so I could learn from him. And he ended up teaching that class, I think, for almost 30 years. And he said, this is now more than 10 years ago, he said, nobody programs anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, because the tools have gotten so good that the abstractions they use are not real programming. And to me, I think he was right by a certain definition, but it's a little bit, again, like just because I don't know how to mill the flour doesn't mean I can't bake the bread. And there's skill in baking the bread. And by the way, there's skill in owning the bakery and buying from the person who bakes the bread or hiring somebody who bakes the bread or whatever. And so where people move up and down the layers of abstraction in order to do something valuable, that to me is a major question.
So I mean, look, I'm completely aligned with this. The baking analogy. I think I'm always in search of analogies, and that's not just because I like them. I think one of the biggest challenges we have, again, from the perspective of education, is translating what is at least initially a relatively opaque or obscure or arcane topic, AI, to a lay audience. It's really hard, and I think people sometimes sort of they either like revert too quickly to sort of like the shortcuts. So prompt engineering for me is like, there's I think there's a lot of folks who have spent a relatively small amount of time with probably just Chat GPT, and they're sort of going around and sort of bandying about this idea that, well, everybody is just going to be a prompt engineer and that's going to be the job of the future.
That
And
just seems like lazy thinking to me.
lazy thinking, but it's also, I mean,
It's like people
you've
are
been in
doing
the space for,
prompts, therefore everybody's going to be a prompt engineer. That's sort of like in the first 2 weeks of COVID was like, look, it works to work remotely. Everybody's going to work remotely. It's the future.
but I think
Maybe.
part of it, yeah, I think that's true. But part of it is like you've been in the space way longer than me. I've been in the space way longer than most people who are now talking about AI. If you weren't one of like the nerds, there was, prior to November 2022, AI was literally just science fiction. And so you don't necessarily have a like barometer of like what the velocity is. And they're also not on Reddit. They're not on Discord. They're not seeing, they don't know what a reasoning model is. They don't know that the way
Yeah, I
you
think that you don't need to. I mean, again, I don't need to know how to mill the flour to read. Like, here, I'll give you a practical suggestion. Ethan Mollick. Ethan
yeah.
Mollick is a Penn professor, as you know, who does practical tips about how to use AI. Everybody should subscribe to his newsletter who is at all curious about this. And then you'll see how fast it's going.
So that was what I was going to ask you is like, how do we, so subscribing, so just sort of digesting information from people who are taking the role of being those translators.
Yeah, it's what Malcolm Gladwell would call a maven.
Right. And obviously this is the work that we do as well. Not that I have anything to plug
Exactly.
myself,
No, and that's why I think it's very valuable.
but I still wonder about, AI EDU, Ethan Mollick, Roy Bahat. There are not enough of us going out and doing the work of informing the general population, given what you've shared earlier, which is this is a literal, like the scope of this challenge is everybody. Like we are not talking about, how do we make sure that X% of students can improve their literacy because they're not graduating, being able to read and write, or, how do we deal with like, lagging math scores? We're talking about even if you are a top performing student who is going to become a doctor, it is actually, and I've actually talked to my brother's a doctor, and his boss has been an early user of AI. And he was telling me, like, honestly, doctors are actually worse, like, at least near term, like, they're probably going to be impacted sooner than the nurses, which kind of blew my mind. And it's just, like, your point about knowledge work, the conversation about AI previously was, well, basically, the poor people are going to be impacted. It's, what are we going to do with those poor people? It's just too bad. And those are the conversations happening at, like, the World Economic Forum. And now it's like slightly different. It's like, oh shoot, this is software engineers, this is lawyers, accountants. But looking back to analogies, I mean, when you look back at the internet or some of these prior technology revolutions, what worked really well to keep people from falling behind? Is there any sort of analog besides obviously like newsletters and?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the bad news is it was really bad in past transitions.
How so?
I mean, we had 2 world wars after the Industrial Revolution. That part seemed to suck.
Okay. Okay. So you're going back, right? Okay.
And manufacturing transition in the U.S. hollowed out entire places.
Yes.
Like pick your thing. So the risks are real and big. And that's why we need to be prepared for a societal response. And, my best mental model for that is hurricane and disaster response. Like at some point there may be an AI hurricane that some version of FEMA, economic FEMA, needs to respond to the way that we responded to COVID, honestly, economically speaking. And I'm not saying we did all that right, but we swarmed for sure. Then the second thing I'd say, the good news is it's easier to learn this stuff before. If you wanted to transition careers in the past, you might have to move cities. You might not have the tools available to you. But like, for the very technical people or more technical people, one of the great AI teachers who was one of the legendary teachers at Stanford and built the first version of the Tesla full self-driving software, Andrej Karpathy, is on YouTube.
Yep.
That's wild.
Yeah, and yet we seem to be gravitating away from long form content. It's weird how YouTube is going super long form.
I don't think we're gravitating away from long form content. I think it's doing what everything else is doing, which is it's just bifurcating.
It's bifurcating.
It's either very short, but if you look at like the top 10 podcasts, I mean, Joe Rogan can talk. Dwarkesh Patel can talk. And so it is, I think it's bifurcating is what's happening.
Do you have any sense of, I haven't looked at the numbers in terms of like who's actually watching the long form versus the reels. It's not necessarily like older people are watching long form.
I actually don't know. My sense is that it is bifurcating for everybody,
Yeah.
and that age is more about channel. It's more like young people are on TikTok and old people are on Facebook, but that's not a deeply researched thing. That's just kind of a sense.
Like every student being their own CIO, is this within reach for a under-resourced public school, like setting aside like a private school that has
I mean, look, one of the other cool things is almost everything has some version of the tools that is free. And so I don't know if there were ever something that was accessible, unlike accessing the internet where you needed all this equipment you didn't have yet and laptops and internet connections, again, I don't know the educational context. I definitely don't know the K-12 context very well, but at least in principle, most of these tools are free or have a free version that's powerful enough to learn a lot from it.
Yeah, I mean, but can you?
Or am I missing something?
You're not missing something. Unpack this. Like, I'm cognizant that maybe not even everybody knows what a chief information officer does.
Yeah, good question. So what does a chief information officer do? They decide what technology tools a workforce should use.
Okay.
They try new things. They figure out, should I build something myself? Should I buy something? And look, with tools like Replit, somebody who doesn't know anything technical can make what the founder calls personal software. They can make their own software. And, but it's that process of not waiting for somebody to tell you what tool to use, but going out and researching your own that I think is very, very valuable and becoming more valuable.
And this is interesting because a lot of school leaders right now are obsessed with what is the one tool that we get every student to use. And what I'm hearing from you is that may actually be counterproductive to the ultimate goal, which is equipping students with the ability to actually navigate different tools and make decisions about which ones are appropriate.
Great observation. Yes, although I also think, pick any chatbot and make sure everybody has access to it. Because, I can ask Claude, hey, I want to use a tool that communicates securely in the following way. And shockingly, Claude is generally pretty good at that.
How do you use, what do you have an AI, an LLM of preference for your own work?
No, I use them against each other. So like in my writing process, I frequently will basically go out and do a bunch of research, get LLMs to make an outline. I can talk you through my whole writing process if it's interesting, on how I use AI.
I would love it if you're willing. I would love to hear.
Yeah, I can even send it to you in writing. Basically the short version is I have the LLMs. First of all, when I'm doing research, I'll often just talk. So I'll record audio files of like, oh, I'm thinking about this, but what about this argument? I'm not sure. Maybe the other one, blah, 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 blah. And then what happens is I will take that and I'll feed it into an LLM and I'll say, please go research this other stuff that I'm curious about. Find me a fact on this, blah, blah, blah. And then all that leads to an outline. I'm not getting it to draft for me, but I'm getting it to make a rich, detailed outline. And then I'm oftentimes doing the same thing in another LLM. So I have two outlines produced by the same prompts. And then I'll feed each one the other one's outline. I call it dueling LLMs and say, this is the one that came from another LLM. Please improve it and incorporate it with yours. And then they'll kind of converge into something great. And then I'll look at it and I'll sometimes give a little feedback. And then I'll cut and paste the outline into like Google Docs or something like that. And I'll just type until I'm done writing it. And I can go pretty fast, much faster than I used to be able to before. I just wrote a blog post on on what questions a person should ask before joining a startup that was based on that. And so, yeah, it is. It's a process that has been working for me and that I've iterated on. Like, and I expect that, literally just today, my team was talking about some piece of writing we had to do. I was like, okay, could we try using the AI in this way? And so we're constantly probing the limits of what it can do.
Yeah, I also, I mean, I got my scholarship to Ohio State because I won a little bit of money from like a writing competition. So I got a partial scholarship. I've always been a writer. I I actually resonate with teachers when they stress about students using AI tools. It harkens me back to one of the first English teachers that we worked with. We did this training on how, this is like the very first days of ChatGPT, and I caught up with her 6 months later, asked her like, how is it going? Are you using AI in the classroom? She was like, oh my gosh, it was so engaging. My students loved it. She had all these like, really fun activities that she created with the AI. Is the most engaged that she'd ever seen her students. And then I was like, and we actually had a New York Times reporter that wanted to talk to a teacher that was using ChatGPT. And I said, oh, like, well, how are you using it today? And she's like, oh, I don't use it anymore. Well, why did you stop using it? And she said, well, I teach freshman English, and we got to the portion of my class where students were learning how to create an outline. And I realized part of the way through that section that they were not learning how to create an outline. They were learning how to ask and prompt engineer for an outline. And she's like, those are actually different skills. And it strikes me that you're like what you described sounds great, but I think that my suspicion is part of the reason why you're so effective with LLMs is because you've always been a really strong writer, and that you are able to.
So I really appreciate you saying that. I don't know.
I think you're a good writer.
Well, thank you, but you also don't know what I've written versus what the LLM has written.
I've read your stuff prior to ChatGPT.
Yeah, fine. Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
But the thing I would just say about that is I'm not suggesting that people should stop learning how to write. What I'm suggesting is that it's a different process now, and that the same way, by the way, like you could have said the same thing about spell check. And I remember I'm old enough to be like, penmanship is important to learn. Is penmanship important to learn?
I don't think so. I do think that writing is thinking.
Sure. I agree with that. And so my point is not that writing is like penmanship. My point is that, of course, it's important to learn. And the question is how and in what context, and that we should get away from, well, if they're using the LLM, they're not learning to write. It's like, no, they're learning to write in the same way that when I use spell check, I'm still learning to write. It's just different. And I need to pay attention to, how do I edit? How can I compose a paragraph on my own? And we just don't know what all those lines are going to be.
I agree with that. My instinct is that the whole thing about like writing is thinking, and the whole thing about like why does it feel wrong when a student is just getting to the outline so quickly? And I think that there's actually a lot that you gain from sitting in front of a blank piece of paper and like struggling to figure out how to get started. Like you have these thoughts in your head, and this like sort of productive struggle that comes from writing, especially early on, like once you do it enough, you kind of build the muscle memory to figure out how to get started. And, like for me, it was always like, I would spend a lot of time with the first paragraph. And once I had that, the rest kind of flowed. But the process was not just, I think that I actually built and learned a lot from the challenge that I faced in writing. And I wonder if something being so easy, and maybe it's just different ways of creating productive struggle, right?
I think it's different ways. So I think productive struggle is for sure essential, but I think the different ways is the question, because I sort of hear like when I went to school, I had to walk uphill both ways kind of thing. And
okay.
Struggle is great. It's just got to be necessary struggle. And unnecessary struggle can be fine as an exercise. Like, look, I go to the gym. I don't really, but I should go to the gym and lift weights. And that's unnecessary struggle, but it's necessary for my own health and learning, Yeah. And so, but I think I'm not trying to dismiss the idea of productive struggle. I'm trying to dismiss the idea that which struggles are productive is fixed, because I think it's malleable across time, and we should find new productive struggles. That's my kind of general take.
Yeah, and this is where I find that the issue with teachers being worried about students cheating is so fascinating to me because on the one hand, I don't think it's correct to just think of a student using AI equals cheating.
Of course not. At Berkeley, by the way, in my class, I require the students to use AI. The only rule is they have to tell me how they used it.
But okay, so but the nuance is if the student is more effective at using AI than the teacher, and certainly if the teacher doesn't have any comfort or experience with what AI is capable of, I do think that it's possible for the students to get around the teacher's ability to create that productive struggle. Because like if the teacher doesn't know what the AI is capable of, they'll do things like my favorite is when they say, "Oh, I figured out the Trojan horse strategy," and this is one of the things that was shared on Facebook, where you put like in white text some like Trojan horse to sort of fool the prompt into like including the word Frankenstein somewhere in the homework assignment. And to me, this is what this represents. Is teachers are not they're spending too much time trying to figure out how to actually like enforce and like stop students, that they're not investing the time into figuring the tools out for themselves, which I think would get them to a place where they figure out, oh,
Yeah, I mean, that is a you kids and your rock and roll kind of moment.
do you have any? So what other strategies? I mean, so you ask the students to use the AI and show you how they use it.
I have no other strategies.
How can you validate? I mean, like, I assume your homework assignments are not, they're not doing multiple choice tests. They're
No,
not
and
doing like
I don't
short.
have a cheating problem in general because the students can't even disclose their grades. They're paying a lot of money to be there. It's business school. So my view is
Right.
it's not if they cheat, it's fine, but I'm not there to enforce anti-cheating against them. And there's no right answers to the question to ask. Like the final assignment is a personal reflection essay on the class. Like I don't even know what it would mean to cheat on that. Like, did you not share the thing that you, and so it's just different for me and easier. But I do empathize with the fact that in a different context, if you're a math teacher, if you're an English teacher assigning an essay on Sound and the Fury, cheating could be a big deal. So, but I hear you on the desire for people to figure out what they're doing, being something that is, figure out the tools being something that trades off with blocking others from using the tools. So that seems like a real issue to me.
Okay. This self-reflection, this is one of my favorite ones. Been something else that I hear a lot is teachers say, well, self-reflection, something that's personalized to the student. And the challenge is, I think you can actually get a pretty damn good self-reflection with a single sentence prompt. And you could do a little bit more prompting. It would take you probably less than 5 to 10 minutes to get to something that's probably high enough quality that
Totally.
maybe not you, but
By the way, if I had to do a
95%.
self-reflection, I'd be like, hey, AI, look at my emails that I've sent
Right.
relating to this class. I'd upload the emails directly into ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. And I'd say, based on this and also my Slack messages, which I'd cut and paste in, what are my reflections? And then I'd edit that.
And then you'd edit it. But I guess the challenge is what, like, how, and so the point is taken that if you're an MBA and you're cheating, it's like, well, why are you spending the money? Like,
Well,
that's kind of on you.
but also, like, look, if it's easier or harder, I'm not going to the printing press and laying out the print type on the machine anymore either. I'm not doing mimeographs. Like, there's a lot of conveniences that have come along the way, and I think we have to embrace constructive convenience and still find a way to learn the things we need to learn. So your point about productive struggle, I think, is so valid, but the mere fact it is a lot easier does not disqualify it, in my perspective.